So I wanted to start this video on a slightly different note than usual, trying to squeeze my brain out for something smart to say as an introduction. But honestly, at this point, the situation has become so sad, I find myself simply unable to even do that. If you didn't pay any attention to what happened in the gaming world recently, yesterday Bioware suffered what I consider to be the equivalent of having their dirty laundry exposed to the whole world to see. Everything that people were speculating about, how it all went wrong creating this game, seems to not only be true, but somehow the truth even surpasses that tenfold, and it's even worse. I covered the more important bits in yesterday's video, so if you guys want to go ahead and check it out, go ahead and do so down below or follow this link to read the full article on this. But as a longtime fan of Bioware, and most importantly as a consumer, I wanted to continue on that note and go over some of the more details that have been brought up to my attention and how messed up this whole situation with Anthem's development even is. It's not just the horrible mismanagement of this game, the fact that it got stuck in a development coma for the better part of the 6 or 7 years it's been in an alleged development, the fact that the product we see today was literally created in the past year and a half at most, and the fact that no lesson seems to have been learned after Dragon Age Inquisition, and even more so after Mass Effect Andromeda. In fact, there's so much more to that, and the response that Bioware came in yesterday, over which I promised I would make a video and discuss about today, only adds fuel to the already existing fire. The current feel in the community that I see is a mixed bag of anger towards Bioware and EA higher-ups, coupled with sadness towards all of the poor souls who literally had to battle depression while working for these games. So let's go over Bioware's reply real quick and why it got people so mad. To make a short rundown of what happened yesterday, Jason Schreier, who is probably the most reputable gaming journalist out there, posted this extensive news piece after interviewing over a dozen or so developers that worked for Anthem or at Bioware, and the article itself stirred up a lot of discussion. A few moments later though, Bioware also came in with their own statement on their official blog post addressing some of the points said in the article, but the way they did that and the amount of time it took for them to reply to an article several pages long, which takes about 20 minutes to fully read, only added up even more fuel to the already existing fire, angering basically the entire fanbase in the process, or whatever is left of it. In their blog post, Bioware did try their best to calm the waters as much as possible. They mentioned standing behind every member that works or worked at the studio, both present and past, about choosing to not participate in a discussion that they felt it had an unfair focus on specific team members and leaders. They also mentioned accepting criticism and coming up with ways to make the game better, but where they ended up shooting themselves in the foot is in the following statements. The first one, we put a lot of focus on better planning to avoid crunch time, and it was not a major topic of feedback in our internal postmortems. This comes out as a rather odd statement considering that they initially acknowledged that there is a problem with the working conditions at Bioware, but somehow that was never important enough to even be brought up. That really makes no sense to me right now. The second one makes even less sense. We don't see the value of tearing down one another or another one's work. We don't believe articles that do that are making our industry and craft better, which I totally agree with under normal circumstances, except that craft only ended up bringing up and delivering an unfinished product. To go in Bioware's defense though, as I know there's very little of that left, the reason they were able to even reply so fast was because they were sent bullet-pointed summaries of the article prior to it being published. Of course, even Schreier himself mentions that as an update in the article itself later on. The problem though is that Bioware is now left pretty much facing criticism on two sides. One, for not actually spending any time reading the full piece, which contains all of the details, and second, Bioware making the wrong assumptions about stuff that wasn't even being talked about. For example, in regards to their statement about the article having an unfair focus on certain team members or leaders, that's not what was actually even inside the article. There's very little mention of developers by name, and even when it does happen, it's not to point blame towards anybody by name, it's mostly about publicly available knowledge, like for example a certain game director being put in charge of the studio to lead Anthem's development at a certain point. If anything, my conclusion after reading this article is that the blame doesn't even fall on one person, but in fact on the entire Bioware leadership and the people who were in charge for the better part of Anthem's development. In fact, fact, at various points, it's even mentioned that some of the newer heads at Bioware changed the course of the game for the better. For example, Mark Dara, the current executive producer at Anthem, was praised for actually being the one to be able to make decisions and push the team towards finishing the game. Of course, this all came in at the cost of crunching these hours, and they did as much as humanly possible in the few months they had up until finishing the game. Anyway, the battle didn't stop just there, but in fact it was even taken on Twitter and even on Reddit. After Bioware's blog post, Schreier came in with his own tweet pretty much blaming Bioware for not even reading his full story, and how that in itself was a testament of some of the problems highlighted in the article itself. A company that lost a dozen of employees due to burnout, stress and depression in the past 2 years, this on top of the huge problems they were already facing. And according to this later tweet, after talking to several current and former Bioware employees since the article went live, the general consensus has been sadness and disappointment at Bioware's statement, which read as disheartening to those who were hoping for a change. The fan replies haven't been going great either, though there is a mixed reception here as well. Some folks are urging Casey Hudson to pull the studio from under EA, as their name is pretty much dying and losing any form of credibility. Some of them are even saying that Bioware is displaying an attitude of defiance and arrogance in face of this criticism, and all around Bioware would have been much better if they hadn't replied at all, or at the very least waited at least a few hours or a couple of days before posting anything. It seems that a lot of stuff from the past proved to not be of any kind of learning lesson for the heads over at Bioware, and if you go back and check the article, this goes beyond just the mismanaging and lacking vision problems. It goes all around back to the absurdity levels that we've seen only in Andromeda. And speaking of Andromeda, there was this mandate coming from the Anthem directors to make the game unmemeable, of course following the reaction that the players had to the previous Mass Effect installment, which was Andromeda. But in the process of trying to do that, instead of actually building up a game, they only ended up in the same situation they were trying to avoid, with Anthem now being an even bigger meme material than Andromeda ever hoped to be. The performance capture ended up being way too costly, and what this meant is that the studio only had one take, as in one take, to do all of the dialogues and all of the stuff regarding the story. That is why in the process you're going to see a lot of stuff that doesn't make any sense in the game. This is why we have certain characters in the game being introduced to the players in an odd order. That is why some characters are mentioning cities, places or events that we never got to see or experience, and this is just some of the stuff that is being highlighted in the article. As I've said, one single video doesn't even have enough time to contain all of it. We also finally have an answer to why Anthem seems to not have learned anything from its competitors, from the other looter shooters out there, and especially from games like Destiny or Division. It's because the leadership didn't even want to discuss these games, especially Destiny. How could they even learn anything from their experience if they were pretty much blindfolding themselves in face of these games? Even the current problems that were brought up in regards to the weapon variety, which is something that the player base has been complaining for quite some time, was brought up by developers during Anthem's development, and the response that they did was, it was just disheartening to even read, but it went something like not having design skills to be able to do that. So imagine having a leader telling you that you don't have design skills to do that the studio itself, which is responsible for some of the most amazing games out there with some very creative people in it, not having design skills to be able to do that. And the thing here is that you can't even shift this blame on EA, for example, which I know is something that a lot of people are doing. Maybe the slight blame you can shift on them is the fact that they gave Bioware an ultimatum to release the game no later than March 2019, but that is beyond understandable given the fact that they were given 7 whole years to make this game and they still didn't come up with anything. If anything, people should even praise EA for the fact that Anthem is even in this state and for the fact that it contains some of the main core features that a lot of players have been enjoying. One such feature is the flight mechanic. If it hadn't been for certain persons at EA, that wouldn't have even been in Anthem in the first place. But to summarize it all and to bring you a crazy story, back in 2017, Patrick Sutherland, who was an executive at EA and basically the guy Bioware leadership was reporting to, played the demo that the studio ended up creating at that time. Of course, it was a rough concept, it was pretty bad, and a lot of developers working upon it said that it felt dull and mundane. But according to the article, Sutherland was so disappointed with how it turned out to be that he lashed out saying, "This is not what you have promised to me as a game," and pretty much forced the studio to come up with something better. Only then was it when the flight mechanic was finally re-added in the game after already being taken out several times. Bioware also had to spend 6 weeks basically creating a whole new demo just for Sutherland, including the new flight mechanic as well as new assets and graphics to make it look better, as this was also a point of complaint for him. But keep in mind that this was 2017, just months prior to the E3 gameplay trailer. The demo that Sutherland played weeks or months prior to the E3 convention became basically the foundation of the gameplay trailer we all ended up seeing back then. Second, probably everything that gameplay trailer showed was 100% fake, which is why there's such a difference between what we have today and what was shown back then in that gameplay trailer. This even left some of the developers working at the game at the time asking themselves if some of the features shown in the gameplay trailer were even possible to be delivered, knowing that there were so many problems with the Frostbite engine and how many problems they had developing the game itself. Even the first mission by then wasn't even implemented yet, and it only happened at the beginning of 2018. That is why all the missions in the game feels so repetitive. That is why the game lacks basic functions like map pointers, a chat system, more content, armor sets, diverse weapons and combat, and so on. It's because these indecisions and dragging the time without coming up with anything cost Bioware so much time, so much effort, and it pretty much amounted to nothing. Anyway, the problems seem to be on such a high scale over at Bioware that I'm going to be very surprised if the studio itself doesn't get shut down by EA very soon, or at the very least something major will happen and some form of restructuring is going to be made. What this means for Anthem's future, honestly, I'm unsure. Bioware seems to be adamant at the time of making this video that Anthem is going to go forward and that it's going to deliver on its promises, but what I do believe and do know is that there needs to be a huge change in the way games are developed at Bioware, and I'm fully expecting for the leadership to see some huge shifts in the upcoming weeks or months. For this channel though, and for those who support me, this means that we're pretty much going to go forward as we always have done. So if you know me, I'm always covering the newest games, always covering stuff in the RPG, sci-fi, fantasy genre. The immediate result is that I'm going to be posting other stuff for other video games as well. I'm still going to keep Anthem on my backlog, especially when like big updates start rolling in. Hopefully something like that will happen soon, because Anthem does need a huge content update to at the very least prove to people that it's able to move forward. But that is all that I have for today, and I'm gonna see you guys later, so peace out.